Welcome to Cincy Reform Podcast. I'm Pastor Brandon, joined with Pastor Zac. We are pastors at Westside Reformed Church, a URC congregation in Cincinnati, Ohio. And today we want to talk about something that is kind of a hot topic, I think, in our society. And even many Christians, I think, are kind of wondering this maybe themselves, or at times have wondered this. We want to talk about the issue of how do we know that Christianity is the only true religion? Now that's pretty unpopular to say. There's that famous clip you might have seen where Oprah Winfrey is yelling at a Christian on her show, and the Christian was talking about how Jesus is the only way, and Oprah just kept saying, "How can he be? How can he be?" And this idea that she was trying to promote, which I think is pretty pervasive in our society, is a kind of pluralistic view of all gods are the same, and we're all worshiping the same God, and there's this spirit out there, and we're all kind of doing the same thing in different ways, and we're all true. And so there's this idea that we should affirm all gods as the same God, and we should be excited about that, our culture tells us. But Christians, we have a different view. We believe that Jesus is the only way. And so living in a pluralistic society has challenges for us. But Zac, I don't think that these challenges that we face are new to Christ Church. In fact, we were called atheists at one time. Why were we called atheists?
Well, atheists back in the first century didn't quite have the same meaning that it does today. Back in the ancient world, it was just a given that you believed in God. At least the general gist was that. There might be some who denied all divine beings, certainly, but the general gist, however, was that you believed in an entire pantheon of gods. There are many gods out there. And as these empires, like the Roman Empire, would conquer new lands, they would just take that new people to themselves and their gods, and just add those gods to the pantheon, and just move on as they just devoured more and more kingdoms and added more and more gods to their pantheon of gods. That was kind of the status quo at the time. And then that pantheon of gods became very much joined with the civil government of the time. And so the way then they viewed Christians, because they were unable to then just absorb the Christian beliefs about God into their pantheon because they're completely exclusive with one another, they then called them atheists because they were against their own gods. And they didn't believe in the gods of the Greco-Roman world, but rather they believed this Trinity. In a similar way that the Jews believed in their God to the exclusion of the Greco-Roman pantheon, so too then this Christian sect, as we were called, then were atheists because we did not embrace their pantheon of gods. So probably comes across, I think, to some as if we're being arrogant because we don't accept their gods and we believe that our triune God is the true and living God. But Brandon, could you maybe talk about that? Or are we really being arrogant? Are we really being proud? Or how might we think about this? It probably seems like that to many people, that we're just a bunch of arrogant jerks because we believe that Father, Son, and Holy Spirit is the true God, and that anything else claiming to be God is not. So how might you respond to that?
Yeah, I mean, it does seem kind of narrow almost when you say Jesus, our triune God is the only God. And then people would say, well, that's kind of narrow. What about the God of Islam and Judaism and Wicca and Hinduism, all of these other religions out there? But we also have to recognize, I think, that saying that the triune God is not the only God is also a narrow statement. It's just as narrow to say, no, he's not, than to say, yes, he is. And it's also, so it does come across humble when people in our culture say, I think that they're all the same, or we just can't know, and so maybe we'll just we're all kind of going to end up at the same place. There's many analogies that I hear. One analogy was the mountain analogy, where we're all on different paths, but we're all going to reach the top. You might be on a Christian path going to the top, you might be on the Buddhist path going to the top, but we're all on a path. Another analogy that's used is the blind men feeling an elephant. And so we're feeling this elephant, and the Christian has the ear, and he's trying to describe the elephant, and the Muslim has a foot, and he's trying to describe the elephant, and the Wiccan has whatever. And so we're all feeling the same exact reality, but we're just kind of blindfolded, and we're doing the best we can. And so people would say, so we should humbly then say, not make truth claims that are exclusive of others. But it's really arrogant to say that, because what are you saying when you say, well, you Christian, you're just feeling the ear of an elephant? You're saying Christians aren't saying it, Muslims aren't saying it, Buddhists aren't saying it, Hindus aren't saying it, Jews aren't saying it, but I am.
That's right. I'm
saying the whole of it, and I can tell you that you guys only have a piece of what I see. And so what you're doing is, it might come across as humble, but you're elevating yourself to some godlike status where you have this kind of perfect vision of the landscape, and you can kind of pinpoint where every single religion has gone wrong. And I think it's an arrogant thing to say. It might come across as humble or something, but it is narrow and arrogant. And I think we also need to recognize that they can't all be true. I've noticed as I talk with people who have made the claim, well, I just think all religions are true, we're all worshiping the same God. As I talk with them, come to find out they've actually not read anything. They've not read the Bible, they've not read the Quran, they've not read the Buddhist text or the Wiccan text and all of these other texts. And so they kind of abstractly think that, well, we're all the same. But actually, when you dig in to the writings, like when I was reading through the Quran or reading through all of these other religious texts, come to find out they can't all be true. They have completely different views of reality, of human beings, of God. They are contradictory. And so they can't all be true. Only one of them is going to be true, and we would say it's Christianity. But so I think just kind of from the outset, realizing it's not a humble statement to say this. It's actually an arrogant statement. And secondly, as you get into the details, as you get into the sacred writings of all of these various religions, you come to find out they're all saying very much opposing, contradictory things that cannot be harmonized whatsoever. So then you're kind of forced to say, well, okay, that they can't be the same, and they can't be harmonized in that way. But Zach, as Christians, again, we would say Jesus is the only way. Our triune God is the only God, and any other God is a false God. And Moses and Paul says false gods are actually demons. But does Jesus himself claim this? Is this just something that the church has made up over time, or is this something that's coming out of the mouth of Christ himself? Christ
is very, to use the modern phrase, quote, arrogant on this one. He's very exclusive on this one, because he most certainly does manifest himself as one and speak of himself as one who was uniquely sent from the Father, who uniquely came down from heaven to earth in order to reveal the Father. I think probably the most famous verse that we can think of here is from John 14:6, when Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, the life, and no one comes to the Father except through me. And in that context, he's talking about faith in me, and that by trusting in him, by listening to him, by listening to his word, is how we come to the Father. So someone who doesn't trust in Jesus, who doesn't listen to Jesus, that person can't come to the Father through Jesus. but it's only through faith in Jesus Christ that we come to know the Father. He is that only way, truth, and life. Jesus says this as well in John 10. I am the door. If anyone enters by me, he will be saved and will go in and find pasture, describing his people as sheep who enter into the door to find pasture and good grazing land and nourishment before the Father. John 3:36 is a classic text. Whoever believes in the Son has eternal life. Whoever does not obey the Son shall not see life, but the wrath of God remains on him. Again, a very exclusive statement. This same view that Jesus taught through his own mouth was then picked up by the apostles. And this is an example of their preaching in Acts chapter 4 when they said, there is salvation in no one else, for there is no other name under heaven that has been given among men by which we must be saved, referring there to the name of Jesus Christ. And the Apostle Paul writes this in 2 Thessalonians chapter 1. It's not just from Jesus, not just from the initial band of the apostles in Acts, the early parts of Acts, but also Paul himself, who came later, when he wrote that Jesus will enact vengeance on those who do not know God and on those who do not obey the gospel of our Lord Jesus. So we cannot harmonize other religions with Christianity, and they don't harmonize with one another either. And so, Brandon, if these things are true, that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life, we still have to account for the fact that there are other religions out there. You've kind of hinted at this already. Could you maybe unpack a little bit more in detail as to why we can look around ourselves and there's not just one religion, there are many religions out there? Why might this be the case?
As I mentioned before, I think that there's a kind of a satanic dimension. I mean, if you think about it, if I were trying to hurt the church or I were trying to damn people, I would create confusion. And we see that with Satan. He creates confusion. He sows false teaching. He sows false religion. Christ warned there's going to be false Christs that come. There's false prophets that come. And that's Satan's program. He spins out falsehoods to confuse people. So people can't see the true thing because he spun out 100 false things. And so I think we should recognize that part of Satan's mission throughout the Bible is to sow false teaching and to confuse everybody. And that's what he wants to do. We also see in Romans chapter 1 that everybody knows God. Everybody on the planet, deep down, knows God, but they are suppressing that truth in unrighteousness. And as you read through Romans chapter 1, it speaks about exchanging the truth of God for a lie, worshiping created things over against the Creator. And so we are very much created to be worshipers. But what fallen man does is we suppress the truth of God that we see evident in created things, and we reverse nature, and we create idols. John Calvin called our hearts idol factories. We make these idols, and we worship these false gods, these idols. As we worship idols, that turns into its own religion. So, as we're looking at all of these religion, we're looking at the suppression of truth and unrighteousness. I wanted to read a quote from Scott Oliphint. Scott Oliphint had I think a helpful quote about false religions. He said, "There is therefore in false religions a parody or errant copy of Christianity at work. In every other religion, by definition, there are deep roots at work in a person that includes ritual and worship, and normally a specific set of ideas and doctrines. False religions are bizarro religions. They depend on the real thing for their basic identity, but they twist and turn all of what is right in the true religion of Christianity, and they make it into something false, confused, and wicked. False religions take what Christianity has and use it for their own superstitious purposes." And so I think that's a key statement about how when we're seeing false religions, people and religions that are not in historic Christianity, we're seeing the suppression of truth and unrighteousness, where they've taken maybe isolated segments of truth and they've spun it, twisted it for their own superstitions to feed their own flesh or whatever that might be. But Zach, as we look out in our world, we see so many religions, so many ideas. It can be very confusing for people, especially if somebody's trying to maybe discern what is truth and where should I be, what should I believe. And our culture is now telling them, well, maybe they're all true, or maybe we can't know the truth. Maybe we make up our own truth. Maybe truth is irrelevant. All of these things are, I think, confusing people. But Jesus said, my sheep hear my voice. I know them and they follow me. How would you maybe give comfort to someone who comes to you and says, Pastor, I'm a Christian, but how do I know I'm in the right religion when there's so many religions out there?
Sure. I think that, you were quoting there from John 10, my sheep hear my voice. In that context, he speaks about how I lay my life down for the sheep. And he describes himself as that one who lays down his life and then he lifts it up again as well. And so I think we first need to look directly to the person of Jesus Christ and to look at what he's done and the kindness that he has shown, the supernatural character of his work, the supernatural character of his words, and especially the fact that the tomb is empty. I think that is the first place where we want to look, is to say, if you're asking, are you in the right religion? You say, the tomb's empty. Christ has risen from the grave. And so he has shown by that great and glorious work. And as he spoke to us and interpreted that fact for us and said, I did that, I laid my life down for my sheep. Now listen and hear my voice because I love you, and I've laid down my life for you. Now I've lifted up my life again, and I reign for you with life forevermore, to forgive you, to save you, to protect you. Well, that's where we first look. The simple truth of the gospel itself, to come to a fuller understanding that we are indeed in the right religion. We pick up the scriptures and we read them. Because as we discover within 1 Corinthians chapter 2, for example, that it is through the word of God as it's been brought to us through the apostles and the prophets, that the Spirit performs a mysterious work inside of our heart to testify to our hearts that these words are indeed divine. They are indeed from God, because God the Spirit brings those words to us, not merely to our ears, but also to our hearts, to persuade our hearts and to impress upon us that we are indeed hearing the voice of Jesus, that his sheep do hear his voice, and we follow him, and we listen to him. To understand again that we are in the true faith, we need to subject ourselves not just to reading scripture by ourselves, but to hearing it proclaimed each and every Lord's Day. Because it is the gospel that's proclaimed and preached, not merely the gospel that we read, although that's powerful also, but the primary way that God delivers Christ to us and impresses upon our hearts that Christ is for us and not against us, that he is the good shepherd and that we are his sheep, is when we hear the word proclaimed and preached. Because it is in that context where news is broadcast, where news is heralded and announced. And it's in that moment where we understand that news character of the good news of the gospel, and the Spirit gets to work to reassure us, to comfort us, to open our ears to know that we have just experienced the voice of the Good Shepherd speaking to us, assuring us, and comforting us. So those are some of the places I might start. But Brandon, how about you maybe help our listeners to think about some other lines of evidence that could lead us to a greater sense of assurance that the Christian faith is indeed the true faith, and that our triune God is the true God.
Yeah, so I'm glad that you started there with, impressing upon our hearts. We hear the voice of Christ. We are His sheep, and I do love the analogy that Christ brings out there, because it is true that sheep will hear their shepherd's voice, and if there's other shepherds, they won't hear their voice. They hear their shepherd's voice, and Jesus is saying in John 10, you don't hear the false voices. You hear my voice, and you follow me, the true shepherd. And so I think that it's key that that we do hear, because the Holy Spirit has impressed it upon us in our hearts. But there is historical things as well. There's historical evidence. You mentioned the empty tomb, and there's a lot of evidence for the empty tomb. We did a podcast on historical evidences for the resurrection of Christ. There's evidence for the Bible, and we did an episode also talking about evidences for the Bible and the manuscript evidence. Recently, I was hearing about C.S. Lewis, and how C.S. Lewis, when he was still in his atheism, he was starting to wrestle with Christianity, and he had this kind of atheist mentor of sorts, and he was kind of this like atheist par excellence. And this atheist mentor that he had, he kind of looked up to him, told him one time, he said, there is a lot of evidence for the historicity of Christ and the resurrection and Scripture. Like, there's a lot there. Like, the evidence is there. And he said he was really shook in his atheism to think this hardcore, super big atheist that I'm looking up to even has to admit of the vast historical evidence that we have for the Christian faith. I think is pretty massive. So there is that. There's also the Trinity. I think it was Francis Schaeffer that who said, if there were no Trinity, I would be an agnostic. Now, whether or not that's the case, his point was that the Trinity is so important to explaining our world and our context and our faith and etc. And he talked about how the Trinity answers a lot of the problems that many pagan thinkers throughout time have been wrestling with. I mean, even the early Greek thinkers, as they looked out into the world, the early Greek thinkers were thinking, what unifies everything? And many of the pre-Socratics were trying to find that one unifying thing that united all of reality, all of the cosmos, all of the universe. What is the thing that binds it all together? And because they saw that it can't just be all scattered diversity and plurality, but there had to be something unifying. And of course they gave different answers, where Thales said everything's water, all is water. Behind everything in reality is water. And then Anaximenes came along and said, no, I think everything is air. It's all air is unifying everything. And then you had Heraclitus who said it was all fire that unifies everything. And then you had Anaximander who said, well, I don't know what element is unifying, but there's something that's unifying everything, and he called it the boundless. The boundless is unifying all of reality. And then you had people who said, no, there is no unity in reality. There's no unity in our world. Everything is just so diverse and so different, so complex. And then you had Empedocles, who said reality is not unified, but it's only plural, only just constant change and plurality. And so you see, even in the early Greeks, they're wrestling with, why do I see unity and diversity in the world around me? Many people call that the problem of the one and the many. And nobody was really able to answer the question. But we see, I think, that the Trinity is a great answer for that problem. I think that in the Trinity we have an answer for why do we see unity and diversity and plurality. When I look at a husky and then I look at a poodle, I still say dog. I put them in the same dog category. I unify them. Why? Why is there this unity but also this massive diversity? I think the answer is the Holy Trinity. In the Holy Trinity, you have one God, one essence, three persons subsisting in that essence. You have an equal ultimacy of the one and the many. And it answers, I think, what we see around us in the world. So a lot of these pagan thinkers are seeing the world that the Trinity made, are seeing the world that our triune God crafted, and is stamped with the nature and the imprint of our triune God, and they're saying, well, how do we understand this? And they're coming up with weird things about fire and water, but really it's the Holy Trinity. St. Augustine used this also when he spoke about other religions and how the Trinity it's unique to Christianity. You don't find the Trinity anywhere else. You don't find this idea that there's one God in three persons. And one of the pushbacks that St. Augustine gave to other religions who had perhaps one God in one person is he would say, does your God love? And if they say, well, yeah, my God loves, so did he change? Did he take on something that he wasn't before? Because in eternity past, how was their love? And how was it manifested? Whereas in the Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, there existed that mutual love and communication, and that's not existent in any other deity, in any other religion, except Christianity. It makes sense that our God is love, and it wasn't a change in God as he loves us or as he loves other things. And I think it's also a massive implication for how we think and our thinking. Like, we are made in the image of God. Now, that's not true in Islam. In Islam, you're not made in the image of Allah. There's no connection there. And that's actually one of the problems in Islam is that Allah is spoken of as being so high up, so transcendent, that there's really no connecting point. How do I have true knowledge if I'm not connected with the one, if I'm so different and distinct? But in Christianity, we have a being who is one in three in one, and he is grand and he's ontologically bigger than we are, and we're made in his image. And he has spoken so that we can think his thoughts after him, that we can be conformed into his image in true knowledge, righteousness, and holiness. And that only exists in Christianity. And so as I was getting into kind of researching other religions, reading through the Quran and reading through other religious texts, there's just a lot of problems at work. There's problems not only in how we got the book, like for example, how we got the Quran, I think is very problematic. How we got a lot of the religious texts are very problematic. And even the religion that is being propagated in terms of who God is and who man is, very problematic. And so as you begin to study, you begin to see, I think, that Christianity is the only religion that actually makes sense of the world that we live in. Make sense of who we are and what we see and what we know to be true. One of a great book, if you're interested in learning more about interacting with other religions. Other religions, you have their holy book and their churches and their rituals and so on, would be Scott Oliphint's book, Covenantal Apologetics. He has a great chapter in here on dialoguing with Muslims that I found very helpful. A couple other books I would recommend is Brant Bosserman. He has a book called The Trinity and a Vindication of Christian Paradox. And in this book, he talks about why we need a Trinity and why the Trinity explains how we think. And how if there were no Trinity, we wouldn't have any certainty of the truth. And he unpacks it further in that book. And one final book, also pretty, this is a pretty lay-level book. It's by James Anderson, but he wrote a book, Why Should I Believe Christianity? As opposed to any other religion. This would be a good book to start with. This would be a good book to give to friends or give to a high schooler. Why should I believe in Christianity? Again, very basic, but answering that fundamental question, how do I know Christianity is the true religion to follow?
That's really helpful, Brandon. We hope it's been helpful for you too. Obviously, this is a topic that we cannot exhaust within a 30-minute episode, but hopefully those books are helpful for you to take you steps further. And as Brandon mentioned, we've had some other episodes on this sort of a topic as well, but from different vantage points. And so do look those up if you'd like some more on this. Send us questions if you have them. We'd be happy to interact with you. But we want to thank you as well for joining us. This is the Cincy Reformed Podcast. We are sponsored by Westside Reformed Church, a Reformed church in Cincinnati's Westside. We invite you to join us. Check us out at westsidereformed.org. And again, thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.
Thank you.